Much about the details here. It's just going to look like this. We're going to say const response equals await fetch http / localhost 8080 / to-dos, and then we're going to pass an object to it, and this object will have a headers property that'll contain a content type property whose value is application /JSON. And then down here, we're going to say method. This will make fetch send a post request instead of a get request. And we're going to include the request body along with this. And now that we have the response up here, which is the new to-do created on the server, what we're going to do is say const to-do equals await response.json. This is just how we do it with fetch. And then we're going to dispatch a create to-do action with the inserted to-do as an argument. We'll say dispatch create to-do with the to-do that we got in the response. And we have to make sure that we import this create to-do action from our actions up here. And then, just like in our load to-dos reducer, we're going to want to wrap all of this logic in a try-catch block. So up here we'll say try, and we'll move this all inside of there. And then we'll create a catch block. And if an error occurs, we'll simply say dispatch display alert with the error, just like we did up here in our load to-dos thunk. And just as a side note, in the real world we'd probably want to do some more elaborate error handling here, but for the sake of example, this serves its purpose. So now that we've got our add to-do request thunk, we need to modify our create to-do action creator and to-dos reducer a little bit so that they work with our new server flow. Here's what I mean by that. Let's open up actions.js, and we just need to change the argument name and payload of our create to-do action creator, like this. It needs to be to-do instead of text. And now if we open up reducers.js and scroll down to the create to-do case in our to-dos reducer, instead of getting the text from the action payload and creating our own to-do, what we're going to do is get the to-do from the payload, const to-do equals payload, and then we're going to simply return this new to-do concatenated to the current state. And that'll look like that. And that's it for our reducer right now. The last thing we have to do is open up our new to-do form component, and we're going to make it dispatch the thunk we just created instead of the create to-do action creator. So we're going to delete this line here. We're going to say import add to-do request from thunks. And down here in onCreatePressed, we're going to replace create to-do with add to-do request and pass it the text. And that's it. If we restart our application and take a look at it again, we see that it should work quite nicely when we try and add new to-dos. In other words, it'll actually add them to the server. And if we refresh it now, we see that it stays, which didn't happen before. So far, we have a thunk for loading to-dos from the server and a thunk for creating new to-dos on the server. So one of the next logical steps for us is to add a thunk for deleting to-dos from the server, so that when the user clicks the remove button on one of our to-dos, it actually persists those changes. The process for adding this logic to our application is going to be very similar to the previous video where we created new to-dos. The main difference here is our interaction with the server endpoint. Instead of sending a post request with a payload, like we did in our add to-do request thunk, we're going to be sending a delete request to to-dos/id, and as a response, the server will be sending the to-do that just got deleted, which we'll have to use in our to-dos reducer to remove that to-do locally. So let's open up our thunks.js and add a new thunk called remove to-do request. We'll say export const remove to-do request equals, and we're going to use ID as an argument since the server is now giving us back unique IDs. And this thunk, just like all the others, will return an async function that takes dispatch as an argument. And then inside our thunk, we're going to have a try-catch block. In our catch block, we'll just do dispatch display alert, just like we did before. And then what we're going to do, again, this is going to be very similar to our other thunks. We're going to say const response equals await fetch. And we're going to use backticks here, since we'll want to put the ID into the URL we're sending a request to. We're going to say http://localhost 8080/todos/ and then we'll use string interpolation to insert the ID into here. And for this request too, we're going to have to specify the method. This is going to be a delete request instead of a post or get request. And then we're going to get the removed to-do from the response by saying const removed to-do equals await response.json. And finally, we're going to say dispatch remove to-do with our removed to-do as the argument. And this won't work yet because we still haven't changed the action creator and reducer. So let's open up actions.js. And we're going to change the remove to-do action creator like this. Instead of text, we're going to say to-do, and the payload is going to be to-do instead of text as well. And then if we open up reducers.js and scroll down to the remove to-do case in our to-dos reducer, what we want to do is, instead of getting text from the payload, we're going to get to-do from the payload. And we're going to nickname this to-do to remove. And instead of filtering based on the text of our to-dos, as we were doing before, we're going to filter based on ID. So we're going to say to-do.id does not equal to-do to remove.id. This will filter out the to-do that just got removed from the server. And last but not least, we have to make sure our to-do list component dispatches the thunk we just created instead of the remove to-do action. So we're going to open up to-do list, and we're going to import our new thunk. We're going to say remove to-do request, and we can delete this remove to-do from the actions. And down here in map dispatch to props, we're going to say remove to-do request, and we're going to have to change this from the text to the ID of the to-do item. So just one last thing, we have to go in to-do list item, and instead of saying to-do.text, we're going to have to say to-do.id. And just one last thing that I'm remembering before our app will actually work, we have to go into thunks, and down here where it says dispatch remove to-do, we have to actually import remove to-do from our actions. And then we'll clean this up a little. And now if we run our app, it should work like we want it to. So let's run it and open it up. And now if we click remove on any of these, it should remove it permanently, which is just our thunks at work. Okay, so let's take a look at one possible solution to marking a to-do as completed on the server using thunks. The way I started off was by opening up thunks.js and adding a new thunk called mark to-do as complete request. Export const mark to-do as completed request. And this thunk took an ID as an argument and returned an async function that took dispatch as an argument, the same as the rest of our thunks. And for the body of this thunk, I pretty much just copied and pasted the body from the remove to-do request thunk. The main changes I made here was first of all to change the URL that we're sending a request to by adding /completed to the end of it. And then for the method, instead of sending a delete request, I sent a post request. And then I renamed this from removed to do to updated to do. And finally, the action I dispatched was mark to do as completed with the updated to do that we got back from the server. And I had to import that action up at the top. So with my thunk created, the next thing I did was move over to actions.js and make changes to the mark to do as completed action creator. Just like with the transformations we did when creating our other thunks, the first thing I did was change the argument from text to to-do, and change the payload as well. And then I went over to reducers.js and modified the mark to do as completed case. So instead of getting text from the payload, which is no longer there, I got to do from the payload and nicknamed it updated to do. I then left this state.map statement, but what I did instead of setting is completed true on one of the to-dos was if a given to-do's ID was equal to the updated to-do's ID, I simply replaced it with the updated to-do. So that's all for the basic plumbing. The next thing I did was go to todolist.js, and instead of using the mark to do as completed action in this component, I imported the mark to do as completed request from the thunks and used that down here instead. And then just like we had to do when removing a to-do item, I had to change this argument to ID and change this to ID as well. And then since it's getting passed through to to-do list item, I opened up to-do list item and made this change as well. Instead of calling onCompletePressed, which is now our thunk, with the text of the to-do, I called it with to-do.id, just like we did when removing to-dos. And that should do it for the changes. If we run the app at this point with npm run dev and open it up in a browser, whenever we click mark as completed for a given to-do item and refresh the page, it should stay that way, even when we refresh it. Well, that was my solution anyway. Congratulations if you figured it out for yourself.